Up next on Book TV, Afterwards with guest host Hannah Rosen. This week, sociologist Michael Kimmel in his latest book, Angry White Men, American Masculinity at the End of an Era. In it, the Stony Brook University professor argues that many white men see increased gender and racial equality as a major contributor to their downward mobility, and they're angry about their declining dominance in American society. This program is about an hour.
Congratulations on your book, Michael. I thought it was an interesting idea the first time you told me about it. It does seem like there's this sort of, there's anger out there and nobody's really made sense of it. So I'm glad that you took the time to do that. I would say one thing that strikes me as a journalist reading your book, since you're an academic, is that you operate like a reporter. You're unusually adventurous. And so I would ask you, why do you do your books that way, where you're sort of out and about and talking to different people?
Well, first of all, I think I appreciate that, and I want sometimes to be out and about. I want to be out and talking to people, and I don't want to sit and just manipulate numbers. And I have found these kinds of interviews to be really revealing, particularly with people that I don't particularly understand or I don't really get their worldview. I mean, I actually didn't start this book thinking I was going to go do a whole lot of interviews with different groups. My first, the work, for example, the chapter that's on the extreme right wing, the neo-Nazis and white supremacists, I figured they're so wired and they have so many websites and chat rooms. I figured I could do most of it on the internet, and so I would go onto these chat rooms and and listen to people talking. But it occurred to me, I was on these chat rooms that there would be like 8 people and they would be saying all these horrible things. And suddenly it dawned on me that there's 8 people here and 4 of them are probably graduate students in anthropology. And, one of them is like a high school kid who's like goofing around. And 2 are actually real white supremacists and the other one is like me. So I thought, well, I can't tell who's who.
You can't trust but verify. It's like, how are you going to verify? Right, exactly.
So as you know, as a journalist, you got to have, so you have to have sources that you can at least trust, at least see them. So I decided to go talk to them. And then as I began to do that research, as I was actually working on Guyland as well, I began to realize that I was going to want to talk to people for all of the other chapters as much as I could.
So let's talk about your relationship with Rick, who you start the book with in a gun show, because I think it will give the watchers a sense of who we're talking about, what's sociology, where are we in America, and also a little bit about your relationship with the people that you're interviewing. So who's Rick?
Well, Rick is a guy that I met at one of the very first places that I went to interview white supremacists and neo-Nazis, members of the extreme right.
Where are we?
Well, this is really interesting. When I've told friends that I was going to be doing work on the extreme right, they said, "Oh, you're going to have to go to the deep South, the home of the Klan, or something like that." And I said, well, I don't think so. And it turned out I met him right outside of Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. Yeah. Because along the actual Mason-Dixon line today, there are quite a large number of, white supremacist, extreme right-wing strongholds. And it turns out that in a lot of suburban schools along the Mason-Dixon line, western New Jersey, southern Pennsylvania, a lot of public schools are so starved for cash that some of these schools actually rent out their auditorium, their gyms for gun shows on weekends. So I walked into basically what is a high school, and there's and inside the gym there's just tables and tables and tables of guns, but. Outside.
Is there also like a middle school basketball game?
Nothing going on at the same time. Yeah. But as you walk in, there are tables out in front with lots of pamphlets, right? Not prior to entering the gun show. And the pamphlets are all how the government's trying to take away your right to own guns, and the government's doing this, and Obama's doing that, and Obamacare's terrible. And so those were the guys I wanted to talk to because they were the guys with the leaflets, the ideas. And so I went up to this one table and I just sort of said, I picked up a pamphlet and said, "Is this yours?" And but about 3 or 4 guys standing around at the table sort of talking, and and they looked at me kind of suspiciously, and and they said, "Who are you?"
No offense, but you sound like what you are. You know.
Well, yes, of course.
You sound like a New York guy, right? So it's not. It's hard to hide.
I'm a New York. I'm a Brooklyn.
Right.
Jewish sociologist. Right. So.
Feminist.
Pick two.
Yes, exactly.
But and so of course I'm not going to fake some accent and pretend to be like one of the guys.
Could you even do it if you tried?
I doubt it, actually, but I don't think I would try. So So I said to them, is this your stuff? And they said, yeah, who are you? And I said, well, actually, I'm an academic. I'm a researcher, and I'm doing research on, these organizations, these ideas, and trying to understand the guys about it. And I actually study men who believe this stuff. And they, a bunch of them looked at me suspiciously and said, sort of asked me questions. And I just said, look, here's what I am. I don't get it. But here's my job. I want to understand how you guys see the world. I want to understand your worldview. You will not convince me, and I will not convince you. That's off the table. What is on the table is I want to understand why you think the way you do. Now, here's the thing that was interesting. Now, I would say roughly half of the guys I approached would not talk to me. So there are biases in my research, and I'll acknowledge those.
What'd they say? They just say?
I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk. Basically, I don't want to talk to you. You'd never understand. One or two said something anti-Semitic, but it was vague and not really rather thin and surface.
Right.
It wasn't. But basically, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that.
Right.
But the guys who did, here's basically my pitch. Your whole complaint, as I understand it, is you are the forgotten American. You are the Americans on whose back this country was built. You fought its wars. You built its bridges. You've built the country, and no one's listening to you. I will. I will listen to you.
Yeah.
Now, I will not agree with you. That's not why I'm here. But I will listen. I promise. My job is to, as faithfully as I can, represent the world as you see it. That's what I want to do. So if you can trust that, I'm willing to talk to you.
So who's the guy? Just paint a picture, does he work, does he not work? Before we get to what his views are, kind of age, race, social class, who are we talking about just for this part? I know.
Okay, just for this part.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I do want to say that this is only one chapter of the book in which I try to take up the pulse of a lot of different groups. But I'll describe Rick to you a little bit because he was sort of impish and funny when we met for the first time privately. We had breakfast the next morning at a coffee shop. So he's about mid-30s. He does have a job. And he was working in a construction crew. But here's the thing that's interesting about him. And all of the guys who are on the extreme right with whom I spoke, all of them have the same class background. They are downwardly mobile, lower middle class. Some of the guys you talk to in The End of Men have the same, their fathers were independent farmers, small shopkeepers, ma and pa grocers. They closed the store when Walmart moved in. The independent farmers got foreclosed.
Not factory?
Well, yes. Yeah. High-wage, union-protected factory workers, and the factory closed. Right? So these guys are downwardly mobile. They will not have the kind of wages nor the kind of job protection that their fathers had. And in fact, many of them, they were like, Smith and Sons.
Right.
They were the sons.
Right.
Right. And they or a lot of a lot of the guys I talked to were independent, non-union contract workers, plumbers, electricians, but not union, off the books. But they were all downwardly mobile. That was their background. So Rick shows up, and he decides he's going to be playful with me, and that's one of the reasons that I chose him to introduce the book. So he wears an old flannel shirt and a weathered Pittsburgh Pirates baseball hat because we're now sort of in central Pennsylvania. But he also wears a black T-shirt with a Confederate flag on it, and so he opens. So as he sits down, he kind of opens his flannel shirt and he sort of goes like this and says, "I wore this just for you."
Yeah, that's good. Just to hit all the stereotypes.
Right. Just wants to give it to me, give it to me. So I don't have to make him up.
Right, exactly. Right.
So the thing is, he and his wife are trying to make it on far less wages.
Married.
He's married. He's far less secure. Has 2 kids. 5 and 7, I think, at the time that I interviewed him. Really unhappy with the quality of schools. And of course, the conversations we weren't going to have is, wouldn't it be nice if you had free childcare? Wouldn't it be nice if you could exercise your right to free healthcare or reasonable cost healthcare? We didn't have those conversations. We had a conversation about what he expected as he was growing up, what he thought was going to be his, and what he didn't get, and how he feels, somewhat basically screwed by the system.
Like things have been taken away from him that were rightfully his.
And that, in a sense, that's the line, that's the kind of connective tissue among all of the different chapters. So my book has some resonance with yours. For example, with End of Men. It has a lot of resonance with Susan Faludi's book, Stiffed, which is, the subtitle of that is The Betrayal of the American Men. So and these guys definitely feel like they've been betrayed.
Yeah, I did. I was thinking a lot about Susan Faludi's book when I read your book, because she similarly kind of visits different parts of America and different, ages of people, and the through line is a similar one, sort of what was promised to me, when I was growing up, the fathers in the 50s down to the sons who really have no models for manhood and who have no easy thing to grasp onto as a model for success. Before we get to the entitlement question, which is totally central to your book, the book in many ways, I mean, what's uncomfortable about reading the book is that it's like rippling with sort of racism, sexism, and anger that you see across chapters in a way that's a little bit frightening when you read it all, when it's sort of encompassed like between two covers. So since we just talked about Rick, I'll use him as a bridge. How quickly before you get to the racism and sexism, kind of how does that kind of come up in your different conversations?
It comes up in two ways. The racism comes up self-consciously. So either it's right there at the front because they want to shock me.
Always about Obama, or just like anybody?
A lot about Obama. A lot about Obama. If not Obama specifically, it's a generalized them. Like how they are invading, how they are taking what's ours, that sort of thing.
Interestingly, my brother lives in a very working class neighborhood, and visiting him the last 2 weeks, I feel like de Blasio has just kind of like exploded. I haven't heard it so much in a while, and all of a sudden, like at the barbecues, it's like, whoa, where did this come from?
Really interesting.
Yes, his son, his kid. It's just like all over New York in a way that
So that's the other side
of the
other side of for Guyland, I hung out at a firefighter bar not far from my house, and New York City Fire Department, it's as white as it gets. And so I heard that, I heard a little bit of that, but I haven't gone back and listened to it around de Blasio's mixed race marriage and
it's his
African American
son's afro.
kid.
It's like, really, we're going to talk about this for how long?
I know, really.
Yeah, so
anyway, sometimes it's out front. Because remember that these guys know I'm not one of them. I mean, it's clear. I make it clear. I'm not going to try to pretend and try to pass.
Are they self-conscious about racism, or not even?
Well, see, that's the thing. The sexism is utterly unself-conscious.
Interesting.
There's the occasional swipe at Hillary. But there's never a sense of sexism because they're also proclaiming Michelle Bachmann or Sarah Palin as babes.
But isn't it also because that the rage is channeled through probably a person, like an ex-wife, or you know what I mean? It's like a familiar
for other guys.
For other guys, not
him
necessarily. But you can own sexism more because you have personal experience of a woman who was, whatever.
But I think, in our culture, I actually think that sexism is far more permissible than racism.
It seems like that.
Well, let me give you a really good example of how to think about that. If you remember during the primary season of 2008, when Clinton was running against Obama for the Democratic nomination, and there was a guy who at one of Clinton's rallies, Hillary Clinton's rallies, held up that sign that said, "Iron my shirts." Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And so I asked my students, I teach large lecture class, I said, how many of you remember that? Even, by the way, in 2009, I asked this question, not 5-6 years later. And so I asked the students, how many of you remember that? I got like 10%, 20% hands. And I said, yeah, because it really didn't pass under the media radar. A few of us knew it. People who follow these sorts of things knew it. Now imagine if at an Obama rally, some white guy had held up a sign that said, polish my shoes.
Right.
Don't you think every media outlet, it would have been front page.
Yes.
Even John McCain, every single Republican would have said, wait, stop everything. That's wrong.
Now, is it because they don't think it's dangerous? You know, after all, you're talking to a woman who's running for, I don't know. I mean,
I think it's just because it just seems more acceptable.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Racism, overt racism. Well, prior to 2008, right after 2008, we were all celebrating like, oh, overt racism, that's going to go away. Mm-hmm. Boy, were we wrong about that. But I think that in fact, in some ways, Obama has become such a lightning rod mm-hmm. for the resurgence of overt racism.
Overt?
Yes, well, mm-hmm. still coded.
Right, it's coded. People
still
will
coded,
say, we hate Obama, you're president, that kind of thing. I hear that a lot.
And it's part of what was behind the birther thing. He's not mm-hmm. one of us.
Right.
We know he's one of them, right?
Right.
And so part of this has always been somewhat startling, isn't it? Because, I mean, after all, Obama is not a black president. He's actually a mixed race. Mm-hmm. He is African American. Mm-hmm. He is, he has one white and one African parent.
Right.
It's completely, this is like the one drop rule.
Right.
So it is really, I think interesting that sexism is far more casual. Mm-hmm. Partly because it's the interpersonal, these guys that I was talking with actually have relationships with women. Or yes, they have ex-wives that they hate. They have ex-wives lawyers who they hate even more. Mm-hmm. They have, but they also have, women in their lives who they see as getting ahead of them.
Yeah, there's like a lot more women you can see as taking your job or whatever it is. Yeah. Okay, so we are going to return to that subject when we talk about specific groups, but I think it's important now to define this central concept of your book, which is this idea of aggrieved entitlement, because I have a lot of questions about it, and so just tell the viewers, what is that? What is aggrieved entitlement? What does that mean?
Well, it's a phrase that I came up with because all of the different groups that I talk about, from the men's rights groups to the father rights groups to the guys who beat up their wives or partners or kill them in some cases, to guys who go postal or sort of open fire in the workplace, to the men on the extreme right. What I think the thread that binds all of them is this notion of aggrieved entitlement. And the easiest way I could describe it to you, Hannah, is to tell you one story mm-hmm. Where I first sort of encountered it. I was on a TV talk show mm-hmm. Opposite four of these men who were angry white men. And they all believed that they were the victims of reverse discrimination in the workplace. Mm-hmm. So it was a workplace show in which they were talking about how affirmative action was actually reverse discrimination against white men. They were qualified for jobs. They were qualified for promotions. They didn't get them, and boy, were they angry about it. Mm-hmm. So I was there opposite them, alongside Jill Nelson, the journalist who had written Volunteer Slavery. Mm-hmm. And so the two of us were there sort of opposite them to sort of respond to them. And the reason I'm telling you this story is my first inkling of it was a quote from one of these men, mm-hmm. which became the title of the show. Mm-hmm. The title of the show was "A Black Woman Stole My Job."
Yeah, I saw that in your book, right?
And I thought, and so I said, okay, I have one question for you guys. And it's about the title of the show, "A Black Woman Stole My Job." Actually, it's about one word in the title. I want to know about the word "my."
Right.
Where did you get the idea it was your job?
Right.
Why isn't the title of the show "A Black Woman Got the Job" or
right.
"A Black Woman Got a Job"?
Right.
Because without confronting men's sense of entitlement, we won't understand why so many men, I think, resist gender equality. Mm-hmm. Because we think this is a level playing field. Mm-hmm. So, you have a policy that tilts it even a little bit, and you think, oh my God, water's rushing uphill. Mm-hmm. It's reverse discrimination against us. Mm-hmm. So this is what aggrieved entitlement, I think, it sounds like. Mm-hmm. These were our jobs. Mm-hmm. These were our positions. These are the ones that we were told when we were little, this is what is waiting for you. This is the scene, the funniest scene of this entitlement that I've ever seen is in Monty Python, mm-hmm. where he goes to the castle walls and in the Holy Grail mm-hmm. and says, and goes to the Lord goes to the castle wall with his son and says, "Son, one day this will all be yours." And the son says, "What, the curtains?"
Right.
It's like
right.
It's like one day this will all be yours.
Right.
That is what fathers have said to sons.
Right.
And they expected this. They were entitled to it. And now you're telling them they're not going to get it. Now you're telling them after all these years you have to play fair.
Right.
And so my feeling was that this was that I felt like when I heard this, it registered for me. And I began, as I was doing the research for the book, I began to hear it in a lot of different venues. And so I tried to use that as a framing device on because my argument in the book, or in a way, the way that our books kind of run parallel to each other, is I think this isn't the end of men, but this is the end of an era of assumed entitlement.
Right.
Of the end of an era,
the end of male privilege, or
the end of privilege, or whatever.
Right.
That's what I kept hearing from these guys. It wasn't and they were kind of blindsided by it. You know, it's in our lifetime that the rules have completely changed from the office space in Mad Men, you know, where the men have all the corner offices and the women are like in a corral in the center, and you have your pick. You know, it's like an office perk to sexual harassment, women having the corner offices. I mean, the pace of this change, and I think you point this out also.
It's been really fast and alarming.
It's dizzying. It's dizzying. It's left guys just sitting here. What happened?
Right. So one thing I did while reading your book is trying to imagine one of these guys reading your book. And the aggrieved entitlement makes absolute sense, but I did find it hard to accept them as entitled anymore. So, like, you know, you have a phrase that sticks in my head which makes total sense when you read it, especially to me and you. It's like men have had the wind at their back for all of this time, right? So it's just, you've had tens of thousands of years. It was never a level playing field. We had the advantage, and now we don't have the advantage anymore. It wasn't yours to begin with. It's like we had this push, but they don't feel that way, right? Like, they don't wind at their back. Like, they're looking at Obama and Hillary Clinton, and, you know, they're looking at what the field looks like, and it doesn't look like them. They can't get a job. As one of them says, the only job in my town is to be a Walmart hostess, and, you know, I sure as hell am not doing that job. Like, you know, that it's a girl's job, and it's not even that good a job. So I was having a hard time conceiving of why they should accept your argument that they were entitled. Okay,
so I have just two levels of answer. It's a great question. There's two levels of answer to your question. The first is, does this actually describe their experience? And the second is, why should they then agree with me?
Okay.
So the first part, it seems to me, is the mistake I think that we made, that we being sort of liberals, feminists, basically in the 1970s. When feminism sort of first began to, sort of really permeate the culture in the 1970s, the argument looked something like this: men have all the power. Just look at every single corporate board, every single legislature, state, local, national, international, every university board. Men have all the power, and individually, so women don't have the power, and women don't feel powerful. Individually. So feminism said to women, we as a group need to redress this imbalance of power at the top. And individually, feminism was about empowering women to have a wider range of choices, more options around reproduction, around family life, around balancing work and family, all those sorts of things. So it basically said, so there was a symmetry between the aggregate powerlessness and the individual experience of powerlessness. You apply that to men. Men have all the power in the world. You just look at all these boards and stuff. Therefore, men must feel powerful. And the men would go, what are you talking about? Are you out of your mind? My wife bosses me around. My kids boss me around. My boss bosses me around. I'm completely powerless. That analysis failed to resonate for men even then, because men don't feel powerful. Right?
Never did, or just don't now?
Well, because because there's only one king of the hill. Most of us feel like we have to be subservient to idiotic bosses. We have to be, when I try telling my male students that they have all the power, they have to listen to me.
Right.
I'm giving them a grade.
It's like an organization man idea. The idea that was also prevalent in the Mad Men era, that men we are all little cogs in the wheel. And
that's right. And we're lemmings, and we all take the 737, and we,
like Revolutionary Road. I just put the widgets here and there. Yeah, exactly.
So, and as a result, that syllogism, that kind of model, didn't really apply to men. So then you had all these groups that sprung up in the 70s or so that basically said, you know how you don't feel powerful? You're right. They have all the power. Come on, guys, let's get it back.
Got it. Right.
Or you have another group that said, you know how you don't feel powerful? You're right. let's go to the woods and we'll chant it. Here's the power stick and the power drumming and the power chanting. And then you had all these Wall Street yuppies wearing power ties, eating power breakfast, as if power was some kind of fashion accessory. This was because the idea was men were supposed to feel powerful, but didn't. That's entitlement. They were supposed to feel this way. They don't feel this way. Whose fault is that?
Whose fault is that? And
right?
we'll move to whose fault is that.
And then when you move to whose fault is that, that's why they should agree with me.
Right.
Because I think that they have been sold a bill of goods. I think they have been duped. I think they have been hoodwinked. They've been betrayed. They've been stiffed, all of those sorts of things. But not by the people they think.
Right, got it.
Not by those lower than them. But
not
those,
by the figment black woman, right?
No, not
right.
by the black woman who stole their job, but by the arrogant, cynical elites who are manipulating them into going after those below them, when in fact they can make common cause. So my argument to them is, it's not Timothy McVeigh, it's Tom Joad who is your model.
Right.
The one who makes common cause, who recognizes his plight.
Explain who that is, so people won't.
Okay.
Yeah, just explain.
Timothy McVeigh, of course, everybody knows, was the Oklahoma City bomber. Tom Joad is the hero of the Grapes of Wrath, the John Steinbeck novel about the Great Depression. A guy who is displaced, a migrant, an Okie on his way moving to California, buffeted by cynical elites, impossible bureaucratic odds, farmers who rip them off, and he finally realized that it's not the other guys who are trying to make a buck that are the problem. It is the people who are above him.
Right.
And he then goes off and he says to his mother in the great scene, you just see Henry Fonda sitting there by the candlelight saying this to his mother, wherever there's a man, looking for a job, that's where I'll be. So Tom Joad, or as I say at the end, it's fascinating to me that both Timothy McVeigh and Nelson Mandela use the same poem, Invictus, as their motto. That guys like Tom Joad or Bruce Springsteen, as another example, white working class guy who makes common cause with those below him, rather than rather than then turns them into the enemy.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Thomas Frank "What's the Matter with Kansas" idea, which you quote in the book. It's which is this argument. You're hating the wrong people. Is basically like, instead of hating the corporate powers that have shipped your job overseas and completely forgotten about you and made no amends, you hate the people below you. You hate women, you hate black people, you hate the people you perceive to have stolen your job.
And that's what Thomas Frank says as well. And yes, I have great respect for that argument as well, because I think that there's a kind of distraction going on very often with these, and it's a very seductive distraction.
So one of your most original chapters is about the rampage shooter and what we get wrong about the rampage shooter, and you sort of reconceive who the rampage shooter is. So can you talk about that a little bit?
By the rampage shooter,
school shooters.
Oh, because I actually have a chapter also on guys who go postal.
Yeah, no, not them. That's different. Okay. I mean the school shooters, the young school shooters, like Columbine shooters, those guys.
Well, I'm flattered that you think I have a new take on it, and I'm curious to know what you think that is. I'll tell you what I think is new about it: the sociology of it, all of the work on the school shooters, all of the research that has been done, except for one superb anthropologist, Catherine Newman, who wrote a book called Rampage. Virtually all of the ways that we have approached them has been a focus on the psychology of the shooters. So you have the extreme psychologization, for example, in some of the work on Columbine, David Cullen's book, for example, which basically is like looking at a Seurat painting, like really, really up close, so you see these dots, but you don't see a picture at all, so it's guns, it's violent video games, it's Marilyn Manson, it's goth music, it's any of the number of these causes that lead these guys to explode. And then there are those who have the more social psychological. It's the fact that they were completely bullied, that they were constantly beat up. All these guys have those stories, by the way.
So why does aggrieved where is the aggrieved entitlement in that situation?
So the additional part, and I'll get to the aggrieved entitlement part. So the additional piece that I add is that it's not enough to profile the shooters. We also have to profile the schools if they are school shooters. Now, Sandy Hook, by the way, is a complete exception to this.
Well, that wasn't a kid who.
That's right.
It was a
It wasn't a
grown-up,
student
so,
who was.
yeah.
It wasn't
Yeah.
a student who was coming into his school.
Yeah.
So, and since Columbine, remember, and here's the aggrieved entitlement part. Since Columbine, school shootings have taken a dramatic turn. You don't just go to school and try to kill as many of them, or as you can, as people did before Columbine. Remember Barry Lukatis or Michael Carneal. They're still in jail, but you also kill yourself at the end. This is not suicide. This is like suicide by cop. This is suicide by mass murder. You take out as many of them as you can because they have done you wrong. That's the constant line that goes through it. There's the aggrieved entitlement. The constant line that goes through all of these school shooters' accounts.
Explain it again. Explain. So what?
The account, their accounts are: you have done us wrong. You have bullied us, beaten us up, ignored us, gay baited us, etc. Spread rumors about us, lied about us. And what's really interesting, I was thinking about this on the train down here, Hannah, that the rampage school shooters are analogous to the boys' version of these girls who commit suicide after being so relentlessly cyberbullied and beaten and shunned and all of that they can't take it anymore. The boys explode, the girls internalize. So this is, but it's a similar kind of dynamic. So it's not true that only boys bully. That we know that's not true, but they have different kinds of responses to it. And for these boys, they feel wronged. They feel badly done by. They feel ignored. And I'll show you. I'll get even with you. That's their logic. Now, there are thousands of boys who are feeling this all the time.
Right.
So why is it that school shootings are, although horrifying and in some ways, seemingly a regular occurrence, also reasonably rare? Like 99% of schools haven't had one. Why? If there are thousands of boys who are feeling this every single day in their basements, in their attics, in their bedrooms, blowing up the galaxy on their computer, wanting to take revenge, why don't they? Well, and there you have to profile the schools. You have to say something about the schools in which these school shootings take place. They have certain characteristics. They are what one sociologist called the jockocracy, the place where the jocks rule. At Columbine, for example, one of the players parked his Hummer in a 15-minute zone all day, never got a ticket because the administration basically sort of protected him. These guys rule the school, and the administration and the faculty collude with them. You take the case, for example, of Steubenville, Ohio, not that long ago. These guys, these athletes, if you remember what happened, this is what entitlement sounds like. These guys gang raped this girl and filmed it. And one of them got worried and said to the other one, we can get in trouble for this. Yeah. And the other one said, don't worry about it. The coach will take care of us. He'll clean it up. And sure enough, what did the coach do? That day, he immediately did exactly what this guy said. He questioned why the girl was there, what she was wearing, what she was drinking, whether she had led them on, whether she was complicit.
We've had several cases like this in
the how did the city of Steubenville, Ohio deal with this absolutely a horrific response by a coach? They rehired him. Right? So we're not talking about the Steubenville 2 now. Now we're talking about the entire town rallies behind the coach who who runs interference with the players. That's what entitlement sounds like. This football player was right. He was entitled, and everything worked out as he expected it would. So my feeling is that that's what we have. I want to interrupt.
Right. Yeah, no, I understood that. It seemed to me a slightly different point than the point in the rest of the book, because those jocks can also enter the aggrieved entitlement. Like, that's a more real phenomenon than in other places where, one day those jocks could be Rick at the gun show. Do you know what I mean? When they grow up. At the moment they're not. But that's like old-fashioned class.
Can I just say something? Let me say something about that, though. That is really interesting, Hannah, because these guys, the athletes, the top jocks, the homecoming kings and all, they also feel that they have aggrieved entitlement. They're walking around, they'll say, the guys would tell me, athletes, high status guys on campus, we're walking around with targets on our back. Everyone's looking to get us, to do us in. We're the poor victims here.
Right. Like, I felt
everybody wants to be a victim.
Everyone wants to be a victim. Like that, the relationship between the shooters and the jocks that you describe, that could have taken place in many decades. It's like the entitlement of the jocks, the Hummer. It's more just sort of what happens to those jocks that's the new thing, where every guy feels like he just can't make it. And then my only other response to that chapter is, it didn't seem to me like you had to choose between psychology and sociology. Like they're both, whatever. You have sociology, and then you have some people who interact with that sociology in a way which makes them crazy. So, but it's not, it's not necessarily.
I don't think you sacrifice one for the other. I think that they work that sociology provides that context, and psychology provides the insight into the individual behavior. Why this person and not this person in that context?
Right. Now, the section of your book, which I greatly appreciated because I've been so curious and edited many stories about it, is the sort of thorough take on the men's rights movement. Because I think there's a lot of confusion about what is this men's right. You have a sense that they're very angry, but you have a sense that they have legitimate grievances, and you have a sense that there's sort of an old history to it. But it was very useful, I think, to put all those strands together and kind of separate them in the way you did. So maybe I'll start actually with the history of the men's rights movement, which was quite new to me. I had forgotten it. So can you just talk about the origins of the movement and where it comes from?
Well, I locate the origins of the men's rights movement in Guy's response in the 1970s to the beginning of the women's liberation movement, the feminist movement. There were a lot of men who were, because what feminism, basically challenged was what was called by social psychologists the female sex role, that you have to be nice, pretty, quiet, and do all of those. And women were saying, that's not who we are. We're ambitious, we're assertive, we're competent, we want to do stuff, and we don't want to sacrifice any of that nice, nurturing, loving stuff either. We want to be moms and workers and all that stuff. We want to lean in, we want to listen up, we want to do all of it. Okay, so men basically were saying, and the women in our lives were all, like becoming feminists and critiquing our behavior. And so a lot of guys said, well, they're right. Women have gotten a raw deal here. They can't be all that they, and golly, so have we. We have gotten a raw deal. The male sex role sucks. You can never express your feelings. You can never tell people that you love them. All of your relationships with men are completely, restricted by homophobia and the terror that other people might get the wrong idea about you, whatever. So being a man sucks too. And then there was those who said, it sucks just as much. And then sometimes we say, it sucks more. But basically, the origins come from what was then called the men's liberation movement. That men needed liberation too from restrictive, constraining, oppressor roles, so
but which was sympathetic to feminism initially in its founding, right?
Initially it was.
Yeah, see, that was new. That was interesting, yeah.
Initially it was sympathetic to feminism, but there was also, but as one became angry, and I think there is still a men's liberation movement, impulse, that is independent of feminism, or sees itself as independent of feminism, but not anti-feminist. But that's basically faded. What has emerged now as part of the men's rights movement is that women have actually, basically the men's rights movement takes as true the same thing I often hear from my female students, which is when I come to my classes and I start to tell them the history of sort of the gender revolution, my students say, well, feminism, that was your generation's issue. We won. Thank you so much. But we don't have to worry about that now. We can do anything we want.
The men or the women say this?
The women say this, right? Well, why? Because, of course, they haven't been in the workplace yet.
Right.
5 years after they graduate, they come back and go, you were right. But before that, they think, feminism's over, and we won. So we don't need to deal with that stuff anymore. We can have as much sex as we want. We can drink as much as we want. We can like sports. We can go to law school. We're fine.
Right.
But the men have the same critique in a funny way. They basically think that feminism has been so victorious that women have basically taken over. And there are several ways in which the men's rights movement embraces many of the original claims of men's liberation. For example, around men's health. Now, before they get angry and say there's too much funding for breast cancer, not enough for prostate cancer, before they get there, they do say the traditional definition of masculinity basically means you are indifferent to health concerns. Men do not go to the doctors as often for routine screenings, etc. All of those health issues are true, and they come from a critique of the male sex role. And to that extent, I actually think the men's rights movement has some positive things to offer, particularly around health, around stress-related diseases, around how masculinity leads to greater stress. All that stuff. We agree with that, right?
Right.
Okay. So that part I agree with. that it's somehow because women have taken over the medical establishment and there's all this funding for prostate cancer. I think not.
Right.
No funding for prostate cancer.
No funding, and a lot for
funding
breast
for breast
cancer.
cancer.
Right.
I don't think so. But I don't blame women for this, but I do think that critique is a reasonable one. The critique so that's one thing. I think the major tributary that feeds the river of rage on the men's rights movement has to do with a grief entitlement around fatherhood.
Right.
The father rights movement.
Right. And was that like a minor strand or a separate strand? Like, why did the fathers' rights movement come to define, and this sort of, essentially I think of as bitterness about divorce.
Yeah.
Overwhelming amounts of bitterness about divorce. I mean, when
and child custody. More about custody than divorce, frankly.
But it becomes, the only emails I don't answer are emails I recognize because they're so vile that it's shocking.
Okay.
And so where does that, how did that all come from? Yeah.
Okay, I think it's understandable. Mm-hmm. In the 70s, the critique of the male sex role was enabled men, or in some ways inspired men, to become more involved fathers. This is where the men's liberation and women's liberation movement actually coincided.
Right.
Feminist women were saying, we need you to be better fathers. We need you to be, share housework and childcare. We want to go to work, please, and it's good for you too. And men took that seriously and started, think about this.
Yeah.
Think about your own husband. Think about
compared to my father, right?
Or compared to, my father had to fight and fought and lost to be in the delivery room when I was born.
That explains a lot about you.
Well,
You're a nice feminist father.
Yes, but and he lost. They wouldn't let him in. Now, if the man is married to the woman who is giving birth to the child,
and he's not there, he's a jerk, right?
95% of men are there,
right?
Think of how it's changed.
Right.
Men are far more involved in child care, far more involved, and kind of like it. So what happened since the 70s and so this is why there was a trickle of stuff about fatherhood then. That grew into a veritable ocean of positive stuff and all these, these beautiful pins to involve daddyhood and, and all the stuff, daddy and me stuff. I mean, it's great. But what happened was that those men became more involved, more active fathers, and the laws didn't change. The court system thinks of them as our father's generation.
Right.
The court system thinks of them as wallets.
Right.
The court system thinks of them as utterly uninvolved, married to their jobs, and it doesn't acknowledge that they have more inputs.
Right.
So when they come to a custody decision, they feel like, why did I put in all this work and all this effort and all of this stuff only to lose everything? Now, a little reality is helpful here because the majority of custody cases are not contested. It's not a case where I want joint and you want sole. It is a case most of the time, and in fact, over 80% of cases, the husband and wife who are divorcing agree on custody prior to the court date. So this is a
and agree in which direction? Like the wife has primary custody?
Usually it's joint, or she has sole physical and he has visitation. But there are occasionally, there are 1 out of 5 cases there really is some conflict. He wants joint, she wants sole. He wants sole, and she wants whatever.
Right.
He wants more than she wants him to have. And in those cases, courts tend to side, and I think much of the father rights data probably have some validity. Most of the time, the courts seem to side with her. I don't think that's. I have an analysis of that suggests that it may not be all that wrong. There are a lot of different. There are a lot of cases, a lot of extenuating circumstances for all this. One doesn't know. There's all kinds of charges of, violence in the home, which is also quite pervasive. And there tends to be some correlation with those contested custody cases, whatever. But what I'm saying is that by and large, the anger that fuels a lot of the father rights and men's rights groups is a sense that we changed, the institutions haven't, and so they're furious at courts, at judges, as lawyers, but also at their ex-wives. So there is an anti-feminist strain, but it's not the whole thing.
Right.
And I think of all of the chapters of the book, I actually think that the father rights guys have a legitimate gripe.
Yeah, I've always suspected that somewhere in there is a legitimate gripe against courts that live in the Mad Men era.
But on the other hand, all of the groups that I talk with talk about in my book have a legitimate gripe. I think they're just delivering their angry mail to the wrong address.
A legitimate institutional gripe. How about that? Right.
Absolutely.
There is some institution which is not it hasn't met the current era or something. Like there's some institution which hasn't moved forward.
And the thing that I mean the reason that I'm critical, of course, is I think that some of the reversals of data and all that are simply loopy. But most of the time, but I do get their anger, especially the fathers, the angry dads, who think we changed, the institutions haven't, and that's wrong, and we've been badly done by. There's the aggrieved entitlement. We put in this stuff. We're entitled.
Right. There was the very funny quote you had in there by a kid. I think it was a friend of yours who had been a supervisor or something, and a kid who said, do you spend any time with your dad? Well, he's so busy working on his dad's rights movement that I never see him.
Yeah.
So that was very funny. So I want to return to the rage against women, because you end on this very depressing chapter of this guy who comes and shoots up the women at his gym because he can't get a date. And, there's a sense that there's this like toxic rage building. We'll end on a more hopeful note, I promise, but like that there's this toxic rage. So, some of the emails you quote are, as I said, they're just kind of uncomfortable to read. The emails of the men's rights guys or the sort of letters of the shooters. Just the sense of like anger against women that's kind of hard to take. It's very bracing. And so, what do you do with that? Like where does that come from, and what do you do with that?
I think that I think that a lot of guys have felt personally sort of so buffeted by the changes in women's lives around sexual empowerment, around entering into the workplace, that they feel kind of. I mean, I think that the emotions underneath the anger are that they feel confused and bereft and bewildered and just kind of like at sea. These are unstable emotions. They make you feel like you can't get your footing. You're in quicksand, and I think that that anger is a way to sort of stabilize yourself. Now, in George Sodini's case, which he's the lead of the chapter on the angry men.
He's the one who shot up the women at the gym.
Right?
Yes, yes.
And then in his testimony, he said he hadn't had sex in years. He hadn't even had a date. There's all these gorgeous women. He's not a bad looking guy. He's not a bad looking guy. If you ever looked at his picture.
He says I wear cologne. I mean, it's such a depressing letter.
It is. It is. It really breaks your heart. That and a lot of guys, think about all of those the angry white men who are learning to be successful pickup artists, right? Think about this whole genre of how to become a pickup artist, how to get women to, and I remember when I was a kid that, there were these pheromone-based colognes that if you put them on, women couldn't stay away.
Right.
Guaranteed, money back guarantee if you don't get some tonight.
Right.
And all of the strategies. A friend of mine has done some research on how guys prepare for, going out for bars and stuff with their friends. And because how do you go out to a bar in which the chances of you actually having sex that night with someone you pick up are less than 5%. How do you prepare for failure every single weekend, right? And so there's a kind of resentment, a kind of anger, and then there's all this confusion stuff because look, women have refused to sacrifice their hotness and their femininity for being competent in the workplace. They want to be taken seriously as women and as workers. So, they're beautiful, they're sexy, they're hot, they now they tell us they like sex. How come not me? So I get that. I feel that I can understand that anger. And I feel that guys feel like a resentment,
well, the odd thing is it's infantilized. I mean, there were two things that struck me about Sodini's letter. One is that you read it, and what he's saying, incorrectly, but what you see his logic is, I'm doing everything I need to do to be a man, and it's not working. Like, that's the fundamental truth of his life. And it's all superficial, what he's saying. I'm wearing this, I'm working out, I'm doing this, looking for a job, I'm doing all these things, and it's utterly failing.
And I'm doing all these things that you, women, told me I have to do if I'm going to
it's like that Chevrolet commercial that I quoted in my book in the that ran in the Super Bowl one year, where you had these silent men and they say, like, I've picked up your laundry, I've held your lipstick, it's mute. It's like the men are completely frozen and mute.
Narrated by Dexter.
Yeah, and it's like, and you jerks, you jerks, like you've done all this to me.
And for this, I get to drive a souped-up 1970s car.
Exactly.
Muscle car.
Yeah, so that, but the other,
and by the way, just to let you know, just one thing, this is how I know that this commercial did not necessarily work on you, because it wasn't for a Ford.
Right.
It was a Dodge.
It's a Dodge.
Dodge Challenger.
My mom had a Dodge Challenger, a gold Dodge Challenger. The other thing about the letter, you're supposed to get over that in like middle school, right? That's a very, my husband has said that. Oh God, when I was in middle school, you always felt like the girls had something and you couldn't have. That is a legitimate feeling. It's just you're not supposed to have it when you're 40. You're supposed to understand the world in a slightly more sophisticated way. that's the other thing that struck me as sad about his letter. It's like the thoughts of a 14-year-old boy, not the thoughts of a 40-year-old man. So
let me just take that for a second. Let's take the 40-year-old man and put him back 26 years. 26 years ago, he was right.
Right.
No. 26 years ago, a 40-year-old would have been right to think those things.
Yeah. Right.
You see what I'm saying? That basically you're right to say this.
Right.
That he embraced at 14 the idea that when I'm 40 I will have all of these things. And now you're so it's regressive. Yes, a lot of this stuff is atavistic and regressive. Some of the guys I quote in the beginning of the book, all this, they're taking away our country.
Right.
It's very nostalgic, atavistic, but he was right 24 years ago.
Right.
That seems to me to be a key.
Right.
Things have changed that quickly. So you can't rely on, you're not Don Draper. Right? Don Drapers don't exist any longer.
Yes, Don Draper can go to work, put on perfume, look good, and he will get the many girls. And it's not necessarily going to work.
That's right.
Right. We only have a few minutes left, so I want to end. This is the hardest part. Everyone asks me this about my book. You've got these men who are failing, who are angry. The kind of what can you do question. We all race through that at the end of the book. Like what can you do when you've got this sort of like bubbling, seething rage on the radio and online and sort of in life and with ramp. What do you do with all of this? How do you address these men? They are genuinely, I think, suffering and kind of falling off the map in many, many ways, as fathers, as workers, in all sorts of ways. So they may not be right, they may not be entitled to their entitlement, and yet they are suffering. So what a couple of things that they can do.
I think this is really important because it also defines both of our posture. You and I disagree somewhat in some respects, but we also run on parallel lines. And one of the things that I think is similar between your book and mine is that we both have a significant amount of compassion for these guys who are suffering. We recognize that. What I say is that their pain is real, but it's not necessarily true. That is, they are feeling real feelings. And anger, of course, is the one feeling men are allowed to feel, right? So they are feeling real feelings, but their analysis of why they're feeling it does not match up with what I understand to be the data.
So how do you turn that ship? Like, how do you convince these guys it's not the black woman who stole your job?
Well, there's two ways one can do this. First of all, look, it's a done deal. Right? Do you think that women are going to have some V8 moment where they're going to go, oh my God,
gotta go back home?
Gotta go back home. This voting, working, driving cars, having orgasms. Forget that. Let's go back to the way it used to be. No.
Nor are the corporations going to be like, oh man, you're right. We should have left that factory in Alabama.
That's right. That's not happening.
Right.
Exactly. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So the ship sailed.
Right.
So the question is, are we going to get on board or are we going to swim after it? Right? The ship has sailed. Now, here is where I think we have something to offer. The data on men who, because this is a very, in some ways I'm making it a big movement, right? But it's actually a declining number of men. Because most men, maybe your husband, in fact, maybe, most of my friends have very quietly accommodated themselves to greater gender equality in their relationships, in their families. And you know what? They don't hate it. In fact, they like it. They like having somebody to talk to who's smart and interesting and engaged. They like having those kinds of relationships with their kids. They're actually feeling better about themselves. Men who share housework and childcare are more likely to go to the doctor for routine screenings. There's a men's health thing. But less likely to end up in the ER. Less likely to go to therapists. Less likely to be diagnosed with depression.
So
their children are less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. So, I mean, so here's what I would say. The answer to your question, in a sense, is on the one hand, the deal's done. On the other hand, you know what? It's actually better. Your life will improve. Now, that's on the personal side. On the political side, I think we have to say, what are the institutional, structural constraints that have prevented us from living the lives we want to live? How about adequate health care?
Right.
How about universal child care for our children so that our wives,
they would like laugh in your face.
Of
about
course
those
they would.
too, right.
Of course they would.
They just have to get used to them, I guess.
But my feeling is, if enough of us keep saying this, and I'm sure that this is part of what was happening in those backyards last weekend. The likely next mayor of the city of New York has proposed universal child care to be paid for by taxing the wealthy. Okay, probably won't happen, but it's on the agenda. Someone's talking about it. It's going to increase. Eventually, we're going to end up looking a little bit more like the rest of Europe, like the rest of the industrial world.
I mean, I actually personally put a lot of faith in the personal, the slow, gradual personal experience.
Me too.
You watch TV, you see a lot of guys taking care of their children, much more than there was 2 or 3 years ago. It's on mainstream sitcoms. Everyone has their show, guys with kids, whatever. So you see that, it seems more normal. You're out of work and you end up picking your kids up from school, situation of a lot of men these days. So you just slowly acclimate. Like culturally, we slowly acclimate.
And more of us. So all I'm saying is that in the company corporation to say that you want on-site childcare, we've always thought of that as a women's issue. It's not.
Right.
It's a parents' issue.
Right.
When men come out as parents, we're going to say, here's what I want. I want that. And of course, women won't get it unless men support it too. I'm saying that this is in our greater gender equality is actually in men's interest. That's a different argument than saying, give it up, guys, because the ship sailed. I mean, that may be true, but I want men to feel motivated toward this. I think that as you say, the quiet accommodation is the biggest trend, and as the most dominant one, it has that kind of rippling effect, and I think that's terrific because you see that in all over the country that men are far more all over the country. This isn't a red or blue state or even a purple state thing. This is across the board. Men are spending more time with their kids. They're more valuing them. So again, in parentheses, the courts are going to have to recognize this eventually.
So let's end on that wonderfully optimistic note. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks,
Congratulations on your book.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.